There are moments in life when the world splits in two, the before and the after. And you don't always know when that moment is happening. Sometimes it creeps up on you like fog rolling in off the water, and by the time you realize you can't see clearly anymore, you're already lost. But my moment, I knew exactly when it happened. I can still feel the worn fabric of that waiting room chair beneath my palms. I can still smell the antiseptic mixed with someone's too strong perfume. I can still hear the soft murmur of the television mounted in the corner, playing ultrasound images on a loop for expecting families. And I can still see my husband, my Marcus, walking through that door with his hand pressed gently against the small of another woman's back. She was pregnant, just like me. I should start from the beginning, I suppose. That's how these stories work, isn't it? You can't understand the weight of what something means unless you know what came before it. Unless you know what was built, brick by brick, before it all came crashing down. Marcus and I met at a farmer's market, of all places. I was 26, fresh out of a master's program in education, and convinced that buying organic tomatoes would somehow make my chaotic life feel more put together. He was 30, working as a project manager for a construction company, and he was holding a bunch of sunflowers like he wasn't quite sure what to do with them. Those for someone special. I'd asked, nodding toward the flowers. I don't know what made me speak to him. I wasn't usually bold like that. He looked down at the sunflowers, then back at me and smiled in a way that made my stomach flip. "They are now," he said. It was corny, the kind of line that should have made me roll my eyes, but there was something so earnest in the way he said it, like he'd surprised even himself. I laughed and he laughed, and 2 hours later we were still sitting on a bench near the market, talking about everything and nothing. We were married within 18 months. Everyone said we were rushing. My mother, God rest her soul, had her concerns. "You sure you know him well enough, baby?" She'd asked me the night before the wedding, her hands busy braiding my hair the way she used to when I was small. Marriage isn't just about love. It's about knowing someone's dark corners. "I know his corners, Mama," I'd said. "There's nothing dark there." She'd hummed that low, knowing sound mothers make when they see something their children don't, but she didn't push. She just kissed my forehead and told me she'd be praying. She passed the following spring, a stroke that took her before anyone could say goodbye. And Marcus held me through every tear, every sleepless night, every moment when grief felt like it would swallow me whole. That's who he was to me. My anchor, my safe harbor. We'd been married 5 years when we decided to start trying for a baby. It took longer than we expected. 2 years of temperature charts and ovulation tests, and quiet disappointments that we learned to carry together. I'd started to wonder if it would ever happen. If maybe my body was telling me something I didn't want to hear. And then, on a cold Tuesday morning in February, I watched 2 pink lines appear on a plastic stick, and I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. Marcus came home that evening to find me sitting on the bathroom floor, the test still clutched in my hand like it might disappear if I let go. "Denise," he dropped to his knees beside me. "Baby, what's wrong? What happened?" I couldn't speak. I just held up the test. And when he understood, when his face transformed from fear to wonder to pure, unbridled joy, he pulled me into his arms and wept into my neck. "We're gonna be parents," he whispered. "We're really gonna be parents." That night, he ordered Thai food and rubbed my feet and talked about baby names until we both fell asleep on the couch. And I remember thinking, lying there with his hand resting on my still flat stomach, this is it. This is the life I was always meant to have. I was such a fool. The pregnancy was a dream at first. I was one of those lucky women, minimal morning sickness, plenty of energy, that glow people always talk about. I was teaching 4th grade at an elementary school across town, and my students were thrilled about Mrs. Carter's baby. They'd draw me pictures of storks and ask me daily if the baby was cooking okay. Marcus was attentive, present. He came to every early appointment, held my hand during blood draws, asked the doctors questions I hadn't even thought of. When we heard the heartbeat for the first time, that rapid, whooshing sound like a tiny galloping horse, he squeezed my fingers so tight I thought they might break. "That's our baby," he said, voice thick. "That's really our baby." I believed in us completely. In him, in the life we were building. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They never do they? It's the small things first. Things so minor you convince yourself you're imagining them. It started around my 5th month. Marcus began working later. Not dramatically, an hour here, 2 hours there. He said there was a big project coming up, a commercial development that demanded more oversight. I understood. His job had always been demanding. But then his phone started living face down on every surface. The man who used to leave his screen open while he showered, who had nothing to hide and never thought to hide anything, suddenly carried his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom, even when he took out the trash. I told myself I was being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones, I reasoned. My body was changing, my emotions were heightened, and I was reading into things that weren't there. Marcus loved me. Marcus had always loved me. He'd held my hand through my mother's funeral. He'd cried when he heard our baby's heartbeat. Men like that don't betray you. That's what I told myself. But the body knows things the mind refuses to accept. I started sleeping lighter, waking when he came to bed, registering the time on the clock, 11:47, 12:23, sometimes past 1 in the morning. He always smelled freshly showered, which struck me as strange. Why would he shower at work before coming home? Long day, I'd murmur, half asleep. The longest, he'd say, kissing my forehead. Go back to sleep, baby. And I would, because I wanted to, because sleep was easier than asking questions I was afraid to have answered. One evening in my 6th month, I was folding laundry in our bedroom when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He was in the shower with the door locked now, another new habit, and I glanced at the screen without thinking. A text notification. No name, just a phone number. The preview showed only a few words before cutting off. I felt the baby kick today and I wished you were. The rest was hidden. My hands stopped moving. The tiny onesie I'd been folding, pale yellow, soft as clouds, slipped from my fingers onto the carpet. I felt the baby kick. There had to be an explanation. A coworker, maybe. A friend's wife he was close to. Something innocent that my anxious mind was twisting into something sinister. But even as I constructed these excuses, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My palms went slick with sweat. When Marcus emerged from the bathroom, steam curling around him, I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my hands folded in my lap. Calm, composed. The onesie was back in the basket and his phone was exactly where he'd left it. You okay? He asked, toweling off his hair. You look pale. Just tired, I said. The babies are doing gymnastics tonight. He smiled and came to sit beside me, pressing his hand to my swollen belly. At our 20-week ultrasound, we discovered I was carrying twins, a shock that had sent us both into joyful tears in the examination room. 2 heartbeats, 2 little lives growing inside me. My little athletes, Marcus murmured, and his voice was so warm, so genuine that I felt my suspicions waver. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe that text was nothing. Maybe I was letting fear poison something beautiful. I pushed the thought down and let him hold me. But the text stayed with me. It lived in the back of my mind like a splinter, small, almost forgettable, until something pressed against it and the pain flared fresh. I started paying closer attention. Not snooping exactly, I told myself I wasn't that kind of wife, but noticing, cataloging. The way he'd step outside to take certain calls. The way he'd started buying new cologne, something muskier and more expensive than his usual scent. The way he sometimes looked at me with something that might have been guilt flickering behind his eyes. Or maybe I was imagining that too. I couldn't tell anymore. My best friend, Yolanda, noticed something was off. We'd been friends since college. She was the maid of honor at my wedding, the first person I'd told about the pregnancy, the godmother-to-be of my twins. She knew me better than almost anyone. You seem distant lately, she said one afternoon. We were at a cafe near my school, and she was watching me stir my decaf latte without drinking it. What's going on in that head of yours? I hesitated. Speaking my fears out loud would make them real, would force me to confront the possibility that my marriage, my safe, solid, beautiful marriage, might be built on sand. Just tired, I said. Growing 2 humans is exhausting. Yolanda raised an eyebrow. She didn't believe me, but she was kind enough not to push. You know I'm here, she said simply. Whatever it is, whenever you're ready. I nodded and changed the subject to her upcoming promotion at work. But her words stayed with me, a small comfort tucked away for later. The day everything changed started like any other day. It was a Thursday in March, and I had a routine appointment at my OB-GYN's office, Dr. Patel, a kind woman with gentle hands and a reassuring smile. Marcus was supposed to come with me, but that morning he'd texted to say he had a site emergency and couldn't get away. So sorry, baby. Make sure they email me the ultrasound pics. Love you and my little ones. I texted back a heart emoji and tried not to feel the sting of disappointment. It wasn't the first appointment he'd missed lately. He'd been to the important ones, I reminded myself. The anatomy scan, the genetic testing results. This was just a routine checkup. It was fine. I drove myself to the clinic, one hand resting on my belly as I navigated the midday traffic. The babies were active today, tumbling over each other in ways that made me gasp and laugh at the same time. I talked to them sometimes when I was alone, told them about the world they were coming into, about the nursery Marcus, and I were decorating in soft greens and yellows, about how loved they already were. "Almost there, little ones," I murmured, turning into the parking lot. "Let's go see how big you've got." The waiting room was moderately full when I walked in. A few other pregnant women in various stages, some with partners, some alone, one with a toddler squirming on her lap. The receptionist smiled and handed me a clipboard, and I settled into a chair near the window to fill out the standard forms. That's when the door opened. I didn't look up at first. People came and went constantly in a place like this. But something made me raise my eyes, maybe instinct, maybe fate, maybe just the particular rhythm of footsteps that I knew as well as my own heartbeat. Marcus walked in. He was wearing the blue button-down I'd ironed for him yesterday. His hand was pressed gently against the back of a woman I'd never seen before. She was pretty younger than me, maybe late 20s, with long braids and smooth brown skin. She was smiling up at him, saying something I couldn't hear, and she was pregnant. Visibly, unmistakably pregnant. The clipboard slipped from my hands. It clattered against the floor, a sharp, sudden sound that made a few heads turn. I didn't move to pick it up. I couldn't move at all. My entire body had turned to stone, frozen in that plastic chair while the world continued spinning around me as if nothing had happened. As if my husband hadn't just walked into my doctor's office with another woman carrying his child. Because I knew. In that instant, with a certainty that bypassed logic and landed directly in my bones, I knew that baby was his. The way he guided her, the tender familiarity of his touch on her back, the soft expression on his face, these were not the gestures of a helpful colleague or a supportive friend. These were the gestures of a man in love. I had seen them before, directed at me, in the early days of our marriage, in the first months of my pregnancy. Now I was seeing them directed at her. Marcus hadn't noticed me. The waiting room was arranged in an L shape, and I was tucked around the corner near the window, partially hidden by a tall artificial plant and a magazine rack. From where I sat, I could see them clearly, but they would have to turn and deliberately look to spot me. I watched as he helped her lower herself into a chair. She moved with the careful deliberation of late pregnancy, 6 months along, maybe 7. About where I had been when I first started feeling the twins kick. "I felt the baby kick today and I wished you were." The text message. The one I'd glimpsed on his phone and tried so desperately to explain away. It was her. It had always been her. My hands were trembling. I pressed them flat against my thighs, willing them to still, willing my breath to steady. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get up, to march over there, to demand an explanation. To cause the scene that this moment deserved. But something deeper, something cold and calculating that I didn't know lived inside me, whispered different instructions. Wait, watch, learn, so I did. They called her name about 15 minutes later. Jasmine Coleman. She stood, and Marcus stood with her, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. They walked toward the hallway together, and just before they disappeared through the door, I heard her say something that made him laugh, a low, warm chuckle that I recognized in my marrow. That was my husband's laugh, the one I thought belonged to me. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. A nurse called my name twice before I responded, and when I finally stood, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I followed her back to the examination room in a daze, answering her questions about my symptoms and my weight and my sleep patterns with a voice that sounded remarkably normal. How was I doing this? How was I forming words and following instructions while my entire world crumbled to dust inside my chest? Dr. Patel came in, kind as always, and performed the ultrasound. The twins were healthy, growing beautifully. One was slightly bigger than the other, probably going to be the bossy one, she joked, but both heartbeats were strong and steady. I watched them on the screen, my babies, and felt tears slide down my temples and into my hair. "Happy tears?" Dr. Patel asked gently. I nodded. Let her believe that. When my appointment was finished, I walked back to the waiting room on autopilot. Part of me hoped Marcus would be gone, that he'd already left and I could escape without seeing him again. Without having to control my face and my voice and my trembling hands in his presence. But the universe was not that merciful. They were back in the waiting room, sitting in the same chairs as before. And now I could see something I'd missed earlier. The waiting room television, mounted high in the corner, was displaying ultrasound images. It was something the clinic did. With permission, they'd show the images on a loop for families to share the experience with relatives who couldn't be in the room. Jasmine's ultrasound was on the screen. I stood frozen in the hallway entrance, half hidden by the doorframe, and watched my husband watch another woman's baby on that monitor. His face was tilted up toward the screen, and even from this distance, I could see the tears glistening on his cheeks. He was crying, the same way he'd cried when he first heard our twins' heartbeats, the same way he'd cried when I told him I was pregnant, the same raw, overwhelmed, joyful tears of a man becoming a father. Because he was becoming a father, again, with someone else. Jasmine reached up and touched his face, wiping away his tears with her thumb. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle kiss, the kind that spoke of intimacy and history and love. The kind he used to give me. Something inside me cracked open. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture, like ice forming on a winter pond. I felt myself separate into two people. The woman who wanted to scream and cry and demand answers, and the woman who understood with sudden cold clarity exactly what she needed to do. The second woman won. I left the clinic through a side door, avoiding the waiting room entirely. I sat in my car for 45 minutes, staring at the windshield, watching other patients come and go. At some point, I saw Marcus and Jasmine emerge from the front entrance. He walked her to a silver Honda Accord, opened her door for her, kissed her once more before she got in. Then he walked to his own car, parked just 3 rows away from mine, and drove away. He never saw me, never even looked in my direction. When both their cars had disappeared from the lot, I finally allowed myself to break. The sob that tore out of me was animal, primal, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. I bent forward over my swollen belly and cried until I couldn't breathe, until my chest ached and my throat was raw and the twins kicked frantically inside me, disturbed by their mother's distress. "I'm sorry," I gasped, pressing my hands to my stomach. "I'm so sorry, babies. Mama's okay. Mama's going to be okay." I didn't know if that was true, but I said it anyway. That night, Marcus came home at 7:30, right on time for once. He kissed my cheek and asked about my appointment, and I told him everything was fine. The twins were healthy, growing well. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be there," he said, and his voice was heavy with something that might have been guilt. "The site emergency took all day." "It's okay," I said. "You'll be at the next one." He smiled, relieved, and went to take a shower. And I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold, and began to plan. I've heard people talk about the clarity that comes with crisis, how the mind sharpens when everything else falls apart. I never understood it until I lived it. In the days following that appointment, something shifted inside me. The raw, bleeding wound of discovery began to harden into something else, something colder, more focused. I didn't stop hurting. Lord knows the pain was still there, a constant ache beneath my ribs that never quite faded. But alongside it grew a new sensation: purpose. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to confront Marcus in a tearful rage, giving him the chance to spin lies and make excuses and gaslight me into doubting what I'd seen with my own eyes. I wasn't going to be the hysterical pregnant wife, dismissed and pitied and ultimately blamed for driving my husband into another woman's arms. No, I was going to be smart. I was going to be strategic. And when the truth finally came out, it would be on my terms. The first thing I did was call Yolanda. She came over the next afternoon while Marcus was at work or wherever he actually spent his days now. I sat her down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd made my decision 2 nights before, and I told her everything. The late nights. The phone always face down, the text message I'd glimpsed, and finally the clinic, Jasmine, the ultrasound on the television, the kiss. Yolanda listened without interrupting. Her face cycled through shock, then anger, then a kind of cold fury that I recognized because I felt it too. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hands. "What do you need?" she asked. "Whatever it is, I'm here. You want to confront him tonight? I'll be right beside you. You want to burn his clothes on the front lawn? I'll bring the matches. You tell me what you need, Denise, and it's done." I squeezed her fingers, grateful beyond words for this woman who had stood beside me through every chapter of my adult life. "I don't want to confront him," I said slowly. "Not yet. Not until I have everything I need." "Everything you need for what?" I met her eyes. For a divorce, a real one. The kind where he doesn't get to twist the narrative or hide his assets or make me look like the villain. I want documentation, evidence, proof that holds up in court. Yolanda nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. You want to take him for everything. I want to protect myself and my babies, I corrected. But if taking him for everything is a side effect, I won't lose sleep over it. A smile ghosted across her lips, not a happy smile, but a satisfied one. That's my girl, so where do we start? We started with research. Yolanda's cousin, Brianna, was a paralegal at a family law firm downtown. Through her, we got a referral to one of the best divorce attorneys in the city, a woman named Patricia Acaffer, who had a reputation for being both compassionate and ruthless, depending on what her clients needed. I met with her 3 days later, in an office that smelled like leather and expensive coffee. She was a striking woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked locks and reading glasses perched on her nose. She listened to my story with the patient attention of someone who had heard 100 stories just like it. Do you have any physical evidence of the affair? She asked when I finished. Text messages, photographs, financial records showing unexplained expenses. Not yet, I admitted. I've been afraid to look, afraid he'd notice. Patricia nodded. That's understandable. But if you want to build a strong case, especially if you're hoping to establish a pattern of deception that could affect custody arrangements, documentation is essential. Custody. The word landed heavily in my chest. I hadn't fully processed that part yet. The idea of sharing my children, of sending them to spend weekends with their father and his mistress, his other child. What about her? I asked. The other woman, Jasmine. If she's pregnant with his baby too, how does that affect things? Patricia removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Legally, it complicates things. If he's financially supporting her, that's marital assets being diverted. If he's planning to claim paternity of her child, that affects his overall financial obligations. It's all interconnected. She leaned forward. But here's what I need you to understand, Mrs. Carter. The more evidence we have of his double life, the stronger your position becomes. Not just for the divorce, but for custody. Courts take a dim view of deception on this scale. It speaks to character. Character. Yes, that was exactly what this was about. Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. During the day, I was the same Denise I'd always been, the devoted teacher, the glowing pregnant woman, the loving wife who kissed her husband goodbye each morning and welcomed him home each evening. I cooked his favorite meals. I laughed at his jokes. I let him rub my belly and feel the twins kick and talk about the future like it was something real. But at night, after he fell asleep, I became an investigator. I learned his phone passcode by watching his fingers in the reflection of the microwave door. I waited until his breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep, then slipped out of bed and took his phone to the bathroom, where I photographed everything. The texts with Jasmine, hundreds of them, spanning nearly 2 years. The pet names. Promises. The explicit messages that made my stomach turn. The photos she'd sent of her growing belly, and his responses telling her how beautiful she was, how happy he was, how he couldn't wait to be a family. A family. As if he didn't already have one. I found the financial records too. A separate credit card I'd never known about, used for dinners and hotels and purchases at baby boutiques. A monthly transfer to an account that wasn't ours, $2,000 every month like clockwork. Rent, I assumed. He was paying for her apartment with our money. The money I contributed to every month from my teaching salary. The money we were supposed to be saving for our children's future. Each discovery was a fresh wound. But I didn't let myself bleed. I photographed everything, sent copies to a new email address Patricia had helped me set up, and returned his phone to the nightstand before dawn. He never suspected a thing. The hardest part wasn't the investigation. It wasn't scrolling through love letters meant for another woman, or calculating how much of our savings had been siphoned away to fund his secret life, or lying beside him each night while pretending I didn't know who he really was. The hardest part was the loneliness. I couldn't tell anyone except Yolanda. Not my colleagues at school, who kept commenting on how radiant I looked. Not my aunt in Georgia, who called every Sunday to check on those grandbabies and always asked to speak to Marcus. Not the other women in my prenatal yoga class, who talked about their husbands' annoying habits with the casual affection of women whose marriages were intact. I smiled through all of it, nodded along, played the part of the happy, expectant mother with a devoted husband. Meanwhile, inside, I was drowning. Some nights, after Marcus was asleep and I'd finished my evidence gathering, I would sit in the nursery we'd been decorating together. The walls were painted a soft sage green, his choice, actually. He'd spent an entire weekend doing it, so careful to get the edges right. I'd brought him lemonade and watched from the doorway, so full of love I thought my heart might burst. Now I sat in the glider we'd picked out together, surrounded by the cribs and the changing table and the tiny clothes hanging in the closet, and I tried to reconcile the man who'd painted these walls with the man who was building a separate life with someone else. How long had he been lying? The texts went back nearly 2 years, which meant he'd started seeing Jasmine while we were still trying to conceive, while I was crying over negative pregnancy tests and wondering if my body was broken, while he was holding me and promising that we'd get through it together. He'd been with her, creating a child with her, apparently, while I was desperate for one of our own. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the cruelty of the timeline. The way he'd let me suffer and hope and grieve, all while having exactly what I wanted with someone else. At my next appointment with Patricia, I laid everything out. The texts, the financial records, the timeline of the affair. The evidence that Jasmine's pregnancy was roughly 3 months behind my own, meaning he'd gotten her pregnant while I was in my first trimester, still terrified of miscarriage, still treating each day as a fragile gift. Patricia reviewed everything with clinical precision, making notes and asking clarifying questions. When she finished, she looked up at me with something like respect in her eyes. "This is comprehensive," she said. "More than most clients are able to gather. You've done well, Mrs. Carter." "Denise," I said, "please, I don't want to be Mrs. Carter anymore." She nodded, understanding. "Denise, based on what you've brought me, we have a very strong case." The financial diversion alone is significant. That's marital assets being used to support an extramarital affair and an outside household. Combined with the deception about his whereabouts and the emotional nature of the relationship documented in these messages, any judge is going to take your side. "What about custody?" I asked. "Of my twins, I mean. Given the circumstances, I'd recommend pushing for primary custody with limited visitation rights for him. His pattern of deception and financial irresponsibility raises legitimate concerns about his judgment as a parent." She paused. "Of course, he'll likely fight that. Men like this often do, not because they genuinely want custody, but because they can't stand to lose." I thought about Marcus, charming, persuasive Marcus, who could sell ice to polar bears, who had convinced me year after year that he was exactly who he appeared to be. "Let him fight," I said quietly. "I have the truth on my side." It was Yolanda who suggested the gender reveal party. We were at her apartment, going over the final details of my exit strategy. Patricia had prepared the divorce papers, and we'd scheduled the serving for the following week. The plan was simple. Have him served at his office, then change the locks while he was at work. Clean, clinical, done. But something about it felt unsatisfying. After everything he'd done, the lies, the betrayal, the months of living in a carefully constructed fantasy, was I really just going to hand him papers and walk away? "I want him to feel it," I admitted, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. "I want him to be exposed, not just to me but to everyone, his friends, his family, the people who think he's such a good man." Yolanda was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. "You know," she said, "you never did have a gender reveal party." I frowned. "We decided not to. Marcus said he wanted it to be a surprise." "Right, but maybe you changed your mind. Maybe you want to celebrate your twins with the people who love you." Her smile sharpened. "And maybe while everyone's gathered together, you could share some additional revelations." I stared at her. The idea was audacious, dramatic, possibly unhinged. It was perfect. The planning took 2 weeks. I told Marcus I'd been feeling disconnected from our community, that with everything happening so fast, I wanted a chance to celebrate the twins properly before they arrived. A gender reveal party, intimate but meaningful, with close friends and family. He was enthusiastic. Of course he was. He loved being the center of attention, the proud father to be showing off his beautiful pregnant wife. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush. We set the date for a Saturday afternoon in late April. I was 34 weeks pregnant by then, huge and uncomfortable but running on pure adrenaline. Yolanda helped me with everything, the invitations, the decorations, the catering. She also helped with the other preparations, the ones Marcus didn't know about. The guest list was carefully curated. His parents, who adored me and had no idea what their son was capable of. His brother and sister-in-law. his best friend, Devin, and Devin's wife, a few of our couple friends. My aunt, who flew in from Georgia. Yolanda, of course, who would be positioned near the door in case anyone tried to leave before the show was over. And one additional guest, invited separately, who had no idea what she was walking into either. The day of the party arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt almost mocking. Blue skies, gentle breeze, the cherry trees in our backyard just beginning to bloom. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind racing through every possible scenario, every contingency plan. Marcus was cheerful that morning, almost boyish in his excitement. He helped me set up the folding tables in the yard, hung streamers from the porch railings, arranged the balloon arch that Yolanda had rented from a party supply company. Pink and blue balloons intertwined with a big question mark in the center. "This was a great idea, baby," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind, his hands resting on my belly. "I'm glad you wanted to do this." I leaned back into him, letting him hold me one last time, letting myself remember just for a moment what it had felt like to believe in him. "Me too," I said softly. "I think it's going to be unforgettable." Guests started arriving around 2 o'clock. Marcus's parents were first, his mother, Lorraine, pulling me into a careful hug and exclaiming over how big I'd gotten. "Those babies are going to be here before we know it," she said, beaming. "I've already started knitting. I hope you don't mind matching sweaters." "I would love matching sweaters," I said and meant it. Lorraine had always been kind to me. That was going to make the next few hours harder. His father, Harold, shook my hand in his formal way and asked about my blood pressure. He was a retired physician, always concerned with health metrics. "You're taking care of yourself, eating enough protein." "Yes, sir. Doctor says I'm doing great." More guests trickled in. Devin and his wife, Keisha, brought a beautiful gift basket full of baby essentials. Marcus's sister-in-law, Tanya, arrived with a homemade cake decorated with tiny fondant question marks. My aunt pressed a worn Bible into my hands and told me she'd been praying over it for weeks. I smiled at each of them, hugged them, thanked them for coming, and I watched the clock. Yolanda was stationed by the front door, greeting arrivals and subtly tracking who had come in. At 2:45, she caught my eye across the yard and gave me a small nod. Everyone was here, almost everyone. At exactly 3 o'clock, while Marcus was in the middle of a conversation with Devin about some sports game I didn't care about, a silver Honda Accord pulled up to the curb in front of our house. I watched through the kitchen window as Jasmine Coleman stepped out. She was wearing a yellow sundress that strained against her pregnant belly, her braids pulled up in an elegant updo. She looked nervous, glancing at the address on her phone, then at the balloons visible from the street. She didn't know whose party this was. She only knew that she'd received an invitation, hand-delivered to her apartment, from someone claiming to be a friend of Marcus's who wanted to throw him a surprise celebration. The invitation had said he would be here, that she was welcome, encouraged even to come and be part of this special moment. She had no idea I existed, and in about 15 minutes she was going to learn everything. Yolanda intercepted her at the door. "You must be Jasmine," I heard her say, warm and welcoming. "Marcus has told us so much about you. Come in, the party's in the backyard." From my position in the kitchen, I watched Jasmine follow Yolanda through the house. She was looking around at the photos on the walls. Me and Marcus on our wedding day. Me and Marcus at a beach vacation. Me and Marcus in 1,000 small moments that told the story of a life she didn't know existed. I saw her step slow. Saw confusion cloud her features. Then Yolanda guided her through the back door, into the yard, where 30 people were gathered around a table laden with pink and blue decorations, where Marcus was standing with a glass of sparkling cider in his hand, where his very pregnant wife was waiting. The moment Marcus saw Jasmine, his face went white, not pale white, like every drop of blood had drained from his body at once. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The glass in his hand trembled. "Marcus," his mother said, noticing his expression. "Honey, what's wrong?" Jasmine had frozen just inside the backyard gate. Her eyes were darting between Marcus and me, taking in my belly, my wedding ring, the house that was clearly ours. I could see her doing the math, coming up with an answer she didn't want to believe. "Who is this?" Lorraine asked, following her son's gaze. "Marcus, who is this young woman?" The yard had gone quiet. 30 pairs of eyes swiveled between the three of us, the pregnant wife, the stunned husband, the pregnant stranger. I stepped forward, placing one hand on my belly. My voice was calm, steady. I'd practiced this moment 100 times in the mirror. "Everyone," I said, I'm so glad you could all be here today. I know you came for a gender reveal, and I promise we'll get to that. But first, I thought this would be a good opportunity for all of us to meet someone important. I turned to Jasmine, who looked like she might faint. This is Jasmine Coleman, I continued. She's about 6 months pregnant, and the father of her baby is my husband. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Lorraine made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that might have been a gasp or a sob. Harold's face hardened into stone. Devin took a step back from Marcus as if infidelity might be contagious. And Marcus finally found his voice. Denise, he said, his tone pleading. Baby, let me explain. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said, cutting him off. I have 2 years of text messages, Marcus. I have the credit card statements. I have the bank transfers. I looked around at our guests, at his family, at everyone who had believed in the man they thought he was. He's been paying her rent with our money. He's been telling her he loves her while lying to my face. He got her pregnant while I was in my first trimester, terrified of losing our babies. Jasmine made a choked sound. When I looked at her, there were tears streaming down her face. He told me he was divorced, she whispered. He said he didn't have any kids, that his ex-wife was crazy and he'd left her years ago. She looked at Marcus with dawning horror. You told me we were going to be a family. You said you were looking for a house for us. A house, I repeated flatly. With whose money, Marcus? He didn't answer. He was looking between us like a trapped animal, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. What happened next was chaos, the kind of chaos that only erupts when a carefully constructed lie finally collapses under its own weight. Lorraine was the first to move. She walked up to her son with slow, deliberate steps, her face twisted into an expression I'd never seen before. Disgust, heartbreak, fury, and then she slapped him. The sound rang out across the yard like a gunshot. Marcus's head snapped to the side, and when he turned back, there was a bright red mark blooming across his cheek. How could you? Lorraine's voice cracked. How could you do this to her, to those babies, to our family? Mom, don't you mom me. She was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. I raised you better than this. Your father and I have been married 43 years. 43 years, and not once did I have to question his faithfulness. And you throw away everything for what? For this? She gestured vaguely toward Jasmine, who flinched like she'd been struck too. Mrs. Carter, Jasmine said, her voice trembling. I didn't know, I swear to God, I didn't know he was still married. He showed me divorce papers, he had documents. Forged, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. My attorney discovered it last week. He created fake divorce documents to show you, had them notarized by a buddy who owed him a favor. I paused, letting that sink in. He lied to both of us, Jasmine. We were both his victims. The words cost me something to say. Part of me wanted to hate her, this woman who had shared my husband's bed, who was carrying his child, who had believed she was building a future with him. But looking at her now, with mascara running down her cheeks and her hand pressed protectively over her belly, I couldn't summon hatred. She was me. A different version, a parallel story, but fundamentally the same. A woman who had trusted a man who didn't deserve it. Marcus found his voice again. Denise, please. Can we just go inside and talk about this? Just the two of us. I can explain. There's nothing to explain. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick, heavy with documentation. These are divorce papers. You're being served, Marcus, right here, right now, in front of everyone who thought they knew you. I held out the envelope. He didn't take it, so I let it fall at his feet. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Then Devin stepped forward, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. He and Marcus had been best friends since college, roommates, groomsmen at each other's weddings, the kind of friends who told each other everything, or so Devin had thought. Bro, he said, and the word came out flat, devoid of the warmth it usually carried. Please tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't do this. Marcus's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. That's what I thought. Devin shook his head slowly. I defended you, man. When Keisha said she had a weird feeling about you working late all the time, I defended you. I told her she was being paranoid. He glanced at his wife, who was staring at Marcus with undisguised contempt. I guess she was right. Devin, come on. Nah, Devin held up his hand. We're done. I can't be friends with someone who does this to his pregnant wife, to his family. He turned to me and his expression softened. Denise, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. You couldn't have known, I said. He fooled all of us. One by one, the other guests began to step away from Marcus. His brother Michael pulled Tanya close and whispered something in her ear. She nodded, shot Marcus a look of pure disappointment, and they both walked toward the gate without another word. Harold, stoic, formal Harold, finally spoke. "You will not set foot in our home again," he said to his son. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute finality. "Not until you have made this right, and I don't know if that's even possible." "Dad, please." "Don't." Harold took his wife's arm. Lorraine was still crying, silently now, her shoulders shaking. "We're leaving. Don't call us tonight. Don't call us tomorrow. We need time to process the fact that our son is not the man we thought he was." They walked away together, leaving their son standing alone in the middle of the yard he had helped decorate that morning. Jasmine was still standing by the gate, frozen in place. Everyone else had given her a wide berth, unsure how to treat her. Was she a villain or another victim? I made the decision for them. Walking slowly, one hand supporting my aching back, I approached her. She tensed as I got closer, probably expecting anger, accusations, a confrontation befitting the wronged wife. Instead, I stopped a few feet away and simply looked at her. "How far along are you?" I asked. She blinked, thrown by the question. 26 weeks. "Do you know what you're having?" A boy." Her voice broke on the word. "He told me he wanted to name him Marcus Jr. Of course he did. Even in his lies, his ego came first. "I'm having twins," I said. "A boy and a girl. I found out last month." Jasmine's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry, God, I'm so sorry. If I had known, I never would have. I thought he was single. I thought we were going to be married. He promised me." "I know." I cut her off gently. "I know he promised you things. That's what he does. He promises and promises until you build your whole life around those promises. And then you find out they were made of smoke." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What do I do now? I don't have anywhere to go. The apartment is in his name. I quit my job last year because he said he'd take care of me. Do you have family?" "My mom, in Baltimore, but we haven't spoken in 2 years. She didn't approve of Marcus." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Guess she was right." "Call her," I said. "Tonight, tell her what happened. Tell her you need help." I paused, weighing my next words carefully. "I'm not saying this because I forgive you, Jasmine. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but you're about to have a baby, and that baby didn't choose any of this. Your son deserves a mother who has support, who has options." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why are you being kind to me? I helped ruin your marriage." I considered the question. It was a fair one. "Because cruelty is what he would do," I finally said, "and I refuse to become anything like him." After Jasmine left, driven away by a rideshare she'd called with shaking hands, the yard fell into an uneasy stillness. Most of the guests had filtered out, offering me awkward hugs and murmured condolences on their way to the gate. Some promised to call later. Others just shook their heads, still processing what they'd witnessed. My aunt was one of the last to leave. She held me for a long time, her worn hands pressed against my back, her voice low and fierce in my ear. "You did the right thing, baby girl," she said. "Your mama would be proud. You handled that with more grace than he deserved." "I don't feel graceful," I admitted. "I feel exhausted." "That's because you've been carrying this alone for too long." She pulled back and cupped my face in her hands. "But you're not alone anymore. You've got me. You've got Yolanda. You've got those babies who are going to need their mama strong and whole. You hear me?" I nodded, blinking back tears. "Now." She straightened her shoulders. "Where's that fool husband of yours?" I looked around the yard. The balloon arch swayed gently in the breeze. The streamers fluttered like they were celebrating something. The cake sat untouched on the table, its fondant question marks suddenly absurd. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. I found him in the nursery. He was sitting in the glider, my glider, the one I'd sat in during those late-night hours of discovery and grief, with his head in his hands. He didn't look up when I appeared in the doorway. He must have heard my footsteps, the creak of the floorboards, but he didn't acknowledge my presence. For a long moment, I just stood there, taking in the image of him surrounded by the room we'd built together. The sage green walls, the twin cribs positioned side by side. The mobile hanging above them, tiny wooden animals spinning in lazy circles. We had painted those walls together, assembled those cribs together, dreamed about the lives that would unfold in this room, the children who would grow up surrounded by our love. Except his love had been divided, fractured, given away in pieces to a woman who didn't know I existed. "Say something," Marcus finally muttered, still not looking up. "Yell at me, hit me, something." "I'm not going to yell at you." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm not going to hit you either, you're not worth the energy." He flinched like I'd struck him anyway. "Denise." He raised his head and I saw that his eyes were red-rimmed, his cheeks wet with tears. "I love you, I know you don't believe that right now, but I love you, I've always loved you. You don't know what love is." "That's not fair." The word came out sharp, cutting. You want to talk to me about fair? You were sleeping with another woman while I was crying over negative pregnancy tests. You got her pregnant while I was terrified of losing our babies. You've been paying her rent with our money, buying her things, building her a life, and you want to talk about what's fair. He stood up abruptly, the glider rocking violently behind him. It wasn't like that. It started as a mistake, a stupid, one-time mistake, and then it just spiraled. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to tell you. 2 years, Marcus. I held up 2 fingers. 2 years of text messages, 2 years of hotel rooms and secret credit cards and lies. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. 1,000 choices made over and over again every single day. He was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Denise. Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll end it with her. I'll never speak to her again. She's pregnant with your child. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and immovable. She's pregnant, I repeated. You can't just walk away from that. And even if you could, even if she wasn't having your baby, do you really think I could ever trust you again? Do you think I could ever look at you without seeing her, without wondering who else there might be? There's no one else. There's only ever been. I don't believe you. I shook my head slowly. That's the thing, Marcus. I don't believe anything you say anymore. Every word that comes out of your mouth is suspect. Every smile, every touch, every I love you, I'll always wonder if it's real or if it's another performance. He took a step toward me. I took a step back. Don't, I said quietly. Don't come near me. He stopped, his arms falling to his sides. What happens now? Now you leave. I gestured toward the door. Tonight. You pack a bag and you go somewhere else, I don't care where. A hotel. Your brother's house. Jasmine's apartment, I don't care, but you're not sleeping in this house. Denise, the locks will be changed tomorrow. My attorney will be in touch about the formal separation agreement. We'll work out a schedule for you to get your things. I paused, letting the finality of it sink in. This marriage is over, Marcus. It was over the moment you decided she was worth more than everything we built together. He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The Denise he'd married would never have orchestrated something like today. Would never have stood before him, calm and composed, dismantling their life piece by piece. But that Denise had died in an OB-GYN waiting room, watching her husband cry at another woman's ultrasound. This Denise was someone new, someone harder. Someone who had learned, the most painful way possible, that survival sometimes requires becoming someone you don't recognize. He left an hour later. I stood at the window and watched him load a duffel bag into his car. He paused before getting in, turning to look at the house at me, silhouetted in the window. For a moment, I thought he might come back, might try one more time to plead his case, but he didn't. He just stood there, looking lost and broken and very, very small. Then he got in the car and drove away. I watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner, until the street was empty and quiet and ordinary again, until there was nothing left to see. Then I went to the nursery, sat down in the glider and placed my hands on my belly. It's just us now, I whispered to my babies. Mama and the 2 of you, and we're going to be okay. I promise you we're going to be okay. The twins kicked in response, tumbling over each other in their increasingly cramped space. And for the first time in months, I smiled. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal documents, sleepless nights, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding a life I hadn't known was broken. Patricia Acaffer was worth every penny of her retainer. She moved with surgical precision, filing motions and gathering documentation and building a case so airtight that Marcus's own attorney advised him to settle rather than fight. The evidence I'd gathered, the text messages, the financial records, the timeline of his deception, painted a picture that no judge would look favorably upon. But Marcus, true to form, refused to go quietly. He contested everything: the division of assets, the custody arrangement, even the grounds for divorce, arguing that I had entrapped him at the gender reveal party and caused intentional emotional distress. His attorney sent letter after letter, each one more desperate than the last, trying to poke holes in my case or shift blame onto me. Patricia handled it all with cool professionalism. This is typical, she told me during one of our many meetings. Men like your husband don't accept defeat gracefully. They thrash, they bargain. They try to rewrite history so they come out looking like the victim. Will it work? I asked. She smiled, a thin, knowing smile. Not a chance. The documentation you gathered is ironclad, and frankly, his own behavior since the separation has only strengthened your case. She was right about that. In the weeks since I'd asked him to leave, Marcus had spiraled. He'd shown up at the house 3 times, once drunk, demanding to talk to me. He'd called my phone dozens of times a day until Patricia sent a cease and desist letter. He'd even tried to contact my aunt in Georgia, hoping she could convince me to reconsider. Each incident was documented. Each one added another brick to the wall I was building between us. Jasmine, surprisingly, became an unexpected ally. She called me about 2 weeks after the party. I almost didn't answer, the number was unfamiliar, and I'd learned to be wary of unknown callers since Marcus had started his harassment campaign. But something made me pick up. "Denise!" Her voice was hesitant, unsure. "It's Jasmine Coleman. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something." I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed, one hand resting on my belly. The twins were quiet for once, as if they too were listening. "I'm listening," I said. She took a shaky breath. "I called my mom. The night of the party after I left, I told her everything about Marcus, about the lies, about the baby. I was so scared she'd say, 'I told you so,' and hang up on me." A small, wet laugh. "But she didn't. She cried. She said she was sorry I'd been hurt. She told me to come home." "That's good," I said carefully. "I'm glad you have support. I'm in Baltimore now, staying with her until I figure out what to do next." Jasmine paused. "Marcus has been calling me, texting. Showing up at my mom's house, he figured out where I went. He keeps saying we can still be a family, that you're the one who ruined everything, not him." I closed my eyes. Of course he was. Of course he was still trying to spin his web of lies, even now. "He told me that you'd been planning this for months," Jasmine continued. "That you knew about me all along and waited until you could cause maximum damage. That you're vindictive and cruel and I shouldn't believe anything you said at the party." "And what do you believe?" Silence. Then, "I believe I was a fool who wanted to be loved so badly that I ignored every red flag. I believe he told me exactly what I wanted to hear, and I ate it up like a starving woman at a feast. I believe that you had every right to expose him, and I believe..." Her voice broke. "I believe I owe you an apology that I don't know how to give." I opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling Marcus and I had repainted together last summer after a leak had left water stains in the corner. Another memory, tainted now. Another piece of our shared history that I'd have to learn to look at differently. "You don't owe me an apology," I said finally. "You were lied to just like I was. The only person who owes anyone anything is him." "Still," Jasmine sniffled. "I played a part even if I didn't know it, and I'm sorry for all of it." I didn't know what to say to that. The wound was still too fresh, too raw to offer absolution, but I also couldn't find it in myself to offer condemnation. "Thank you for calling," I said instead. "And Jasmine, for what it's worth, I hope you find a way forward. You and your son both." She was crying openly now. "You too, Denise. You and your babies too." The divorce was finalized 6 weeks before my due date. Patricia had negotiated a settlement that was more than fair. I kept the house, received a significant portion of our shared assets, and was awarded primary custody of the twins, with Marcus granted only supervised visitation. His pattern of harassment and instability had worked against him, exactly as Patricia had predicted. He didn't show up for the final hearing. His attorney appeared on his behalf, looking tired and vaguely embarrassed, and submitted the signed documents without fanfare. And just like that, my marriage was over. I sat in Patricia's office afterward, holding the final decree in my hands like it was something fragile, something that might crumble if I held it too tightly. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked, watching me with knowing eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. "Relieved, sad, angry, empty." I looked up at her. "Is it supposed to feel like this? Like everything and nothing at the same time?" "That's exactly how it's supposed to feel." She leaned back in her chair. "Divorce is grief, Denise. You're mourning the loss of a life you thought you were going to have, the loss of a person you thought you knew, the loss of a future that will never exist now." She paused. "But you're also gaining something, freedom, the chance to build a new life, a real one, on a foundation of truth instead of lies." I looked down at the decree again. My name, his name, the official seal of the court, the end of one chapter, the beginning of another. The twins came early. I was 37 weeks along, technically full term for twins, but still earlier than expected when my water broke at 3 in the morning. Yolanda drove me to the hospital, breaking at least 4 traffic laws in the process while I gripped the door handle and tried to remember how to breathe. "You're doing great," she kept saying. "Just keep breathing. We're almost there. You're doing amazing." "I'm terrified," I gasped between contractions. "That's allowed." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You can be terrified and brave at the same time. That's what being a mother is all about. 14 hours of labor. That's how long it took to bring my babies into the world. 14 hours of contractions that felt like my body was trying to turn itself inside out. 14 hours of breathing exercises and ice chips and Yolanda's steady voice coaching me through every wave of pain. 14 hours of nurses coming and going, of monitors beeping, of doctors checking my progress and nodding their approval. And then finally, a cry. My son came first. He emerged into the world squalling and red-faced, his tiny fists already clenched like he was ready to fight. The doctor placed him on my chest, and I sobbed as I felt his weight, his warmth, his impossible realness. "Hello, little one," I whispered. "Hello, my brave boy." 8 minutes later, his sister followed. She was quieter than her brother, more observant, her dark eyes blinking up at me like she was taking notes on this strange new world she'd entered. When the nurse placed her in the crook of my other arm, she turned her head toward her brother and seemed to settle, comforted by his presence. Twins, my twins, born from pain and betrayal but belonging entirely to joy. "They're perfect," Yolanda said from beside my bed, tears streaming down her face. "Denise, they're absolutely perfect." I looked down at my children, at their tiny fingers, their perfect noses, the soft down of hair on their heads, and felt something shift inside me. A door closing. A wound beginning at last to heal. For months I had carried not just these babies but the weight of Marcus's betrayal, the shock of discovery, the cold clarity of planning, the cathartic devastation of the reveal, the exhausting slog of divorce proceedings. Through all of it, I had kept moving forward because I had to. Because stopping wasn't an option. But now, with my children in my arms and a new chapter stretching out before me, I finally allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. I named my son Elijah after my grandfather, a man who had worked his whole life with quiet dignity, who had loved my grandmother for 62 years, who had taught me what real devotion looked like. And I named my daughter Maya, which means water in some languages, because water is what sustained me through the drought of those terrible months. Water is what cleanses, what heals, what makes new life possible. Elijah and Maya, my new beginning. The first weeks at home were a blur of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights that blurred into sleepless days. Yolanda stayed with me for the first 2 weeks, taking night shifts with the babies so I could rest. My aunt came up from Georgia for a month, filling my freezer with homemade meals and my ears with prayers and encouragement. And slowly, day by day, I found my footing. The house that had once felt tainted by Marcus's presence became something new. I repainted the bedroom, a soft lavender that was entirely mine. I rearranged the furniture. I took down the photos of him, of us, of the life we'd shared, and replaced them with new images. The twins in their matching onesies, my aunt holding Maya, Yolanda making a silly face at Elijah. The nursery stayed the same. That sage green was still beautiful, and my babies didn't need to know the complicated history of the walls that sheltered them. Some things can be reclaimed. Some things can be made new. Marcus tried to see the twins once, about 3 weeks after they were born. He showed up at the house unannounced, looking haggard and thin, clutching a stuffed elephant in one hand and a bouquet of wilting roses in the other. I saw him through the window and felt my heart rate spike, that old fear, that old anger, rising up like bile in my throat, but I didn't let him in. "You need to leave," I said through the intercom. "Your visitation rights are supervised only. You can't be here without a court-approved monitor present. Denise, please." His voice crackled through the speaker. "I just want to see them, just for a minute. They're my children, too. Then follow the legal process. Schedule a supervised visit through your attorney." I paused, my hand hovering over the butt. "I'm not doing this, Marcus. I'm not letting you show up whenever you want, disrupting our lives because you feel entitled to access. That's over now." He stood there for a long moment, the roses drooping in his hand. Then, finally, he turned and walked back to his car. He didn't try to come back after that. 6 months later, I learned that Jasmine had given birth to a healthy baby boy. She sent me a text. We'd exchanged numbers during that phone call, though we rarely used them, with a single photo. A tiny infant with Marcus's nose and her eyes, wrapped in a blue blanket. "His name is Jeremiah," the text read. "I thought you should know. I hope you and the twins are doing well." I looked at the photo for a long time. This child was my children's half-brother. A connection that existed whether I wanted it to or not. A reminder that Marcus's betrayal had created ripples that would extend far beyond my own life. I typed back, "He's beautiful. Congratulations, Jasmine. I hope he brings you joy. And I meant it. I truly did. Because somewhere in the long, painful process of rebuilding my life, I had discovered something unexpected. My capacity for grace was larger than my capacity for bitterness. I could acknowledge the complicated web of connections Marcus had created without letting it poison me. I could hold space for Jasmine and her son without diminishing my own pain. I could move forward without forgetting, heal without forgiving, build something beautiful from the rubble of what was lost. A year to the day after the gender reveal party, I threw another celebration. This time, it was a first birthday party for Elijah and Maya. The backyard was filled with balloons again, but these were rainbow-colored, joyful, untainted by any agenda beyond celebration. My aunt was there, and Yolanda, and a few of the friends who had stayed loyal through everything. Lorraine came too. She had tentatively reached out a few months earlier, apologizing for her son's behavior and asking if she could be part of her grandchildren's lives. I had agreed, cautiously, and she had proven herself to be a devoted grandmother who never once tried to defend what Marcus had done. The twins smashed their small individual cakes with gleeful abandon. Elijah got frosting in his hair. Maya managed to get more on her face than in her mouth. They babbled and laughed and reached for each other the way they always did, these two tiny humans who had come into the world together and would navigate it together. I watched them from the edge of the celebration, a cup of lemonade in my hand and a feeling of peace in my chest that I hadn't known was possible a year ago. "You did it," Yolanda said, coming to stand beside me. "You really did it, Denise. Look at this life you've built." I looked around. At my children, my friends, my family. At the house that was mine now, the garden I'd planted in the spring, the future that stretched out before me full of possibility. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said. "Without everyone who held me up when I couldn't stand on my own. That's what community is for." She bumped her shoulder against mine. "But don't sell yourself short. You made the hard choices. You faced the hard truths. You burned down the life that was hurting you and built something better in its place." She smiled. "That took courage. Don't forget that." I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, terrified, heartbroken, sitting in an OB-GYN waiting room watching her world fall apart. I thought about the choices she had made, the strength she had found, the bridge she had crossed, knowing she could never go back. She felt like a stranger to me now, but also, somehow, like the truest version of myself I had ever known. If you're listening to this story, I want you to know something. I'm not telling you this because I want pity. I'm not telling you this because I want applause for surviving something hard. I'm telling you this because I know that somewhere out there, someone is sitting where I sat. Someone is lying next to a partner they no longer trust, wondering if the suspicions creeping through their mind are real or imagined. Someone is gathering evidence in the dark, or crying in the nursery, or trying to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other when the ground has crumbled beneath them. If that's you, I need you to hear this. You are stronger than you know. The pain you feel right now is real. The confusion, the betrayal, the way the world has tilted on its axis, all of it is real, and you are not crazy for feeling it. But the pain will not last forever. The confusion will clear. The ground will steady beneath your feet again, even if you have to build it yourself, one brick at a time. You are allowed to grieve the life you thought you were going to have. You are allowed to be angry at the person who stole it from you. But you are also allowed, required even, to build something new, something that belongs entirely to you, something that no one else can take away. I found my husband crying at another woman's ultrasound appointment, and in that moment I thought my life was over. But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Today, my twins are thriving. My career is flourishing. I was promoted to lead teacher last spring, and I'm starting a master's program in educational leadership in the fall. I have friends who love me, family who support me, and a home that is filled with laughter and light. And Marcus, last I heard, he's living in a one-bedroom apartment across town, working a job that pays half what he used to make, seeing his children 2 Saturdays a month under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor. His relationship with Jasmine didn't survive the revelation of his lies. She moved on, found someone who treats her with honesty and respect, and is building her own beautiful life with little Jeremiah. I don't gloat about his struggles. I don't celebrate his downfall. But I also don't pretend that there isn't a certain justice in the way things unfolded. He built a house of lies, and eventually it collapsed on top of him. That's not revenge. That's just consequences. So here's my question for you, the one I always end with. If you discovered that someone you loved was living a double life, if you caught them in the act, the way I did, what would you do? Would you confront them immediately, let the rage and the hurt pour out in one volcanic explosion? Would you walk away quietly, pack your bags, and disappear without a word? Or would you do what I did, wait, watch, plan, and choose the moment of revelation yourself? There's no right answer. Every situation is different. Every person has to find their own path through the wreckage. But whatever you would choose, I hope you would remember this. You deserve the truth. You deserve a partner who honors their vows. You deserve a life built on honesty, not deception. And if you ever find yourself sitting in a waiting room, watching your world fall apart, I hope you remember that you have the strength to survive it, to rebuild, to create something beautiful from the ashes, because I did. And if I can do it, so can you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it resonated with you, if it gave you even a moment of hope or comfort, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment. Share your own story. Let's build a community of people who have survived the unthinkable and come out stronger on the other side. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories to tell, more lives to share, more proof that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, you are stronger than you know.